kids on the next episode of the Two Coffins to Speak podcast.
What up, guys? How's everybody doing?
So this is one that we are excited for, and we're like broken records because the last one we were like, we're so fucking excited to talk about this topic. But legit, this is a thing, an event, a person who is near and dear to us, and they don't know how much they mean to us.
I'm obsessed with him. I've probably had a crush on him, I don't know, 10 plus years already.
Yeah. Like, so I watched Wishmaster the other day. And
which I confused for Page Master. And I was like, Kevin, why are you watching that? And then I was like, wait a second, where's Macaulay Culkin? And I was so lost, guys. I was so confused.
And so, like, in between watching Wishmaster the other day and prepping for this episode, I thought to myself, I was like, oh, shit. Like, if I had 3 wishes and I knew that at the end, the third wish would, like, end mankind, I would blow all 3 wishes on just having this person hang out with me and just getting a chance to just hug him. Like, I want to know what a hug feels like from this individual and just embrace it like a nice long, like 38-second hug.
I think honestly, one of my dreams would be to just hang out with him.
Yeah.
Sit in a room with him, talk with him, and just listen to him. And I don't know, but honestly, I would just probably sit there and just be like,
yeah.
And just zone out.
Dude, I'd try to steal shit from his house.
Probably look like an idiot.
All right,
you know what? I don't think you'd have to steal shit from his house because he'd probably give it to you.
It to us.
He would give it to you.
In like the sweetest way. He'd be like, here you go, you can have my automaton.
All
right, so I don't know if anyone has been able to guess it. You probably haven't because that would be freaking weird if you already knew. But who are we talking about today?
Our Lord and Savior, Guillermo del Toro.
So Del Toro's like
God
portfolio of films and art and everything it's huge. It's massive. We have like an entire shelf of our bookshelf just dedicated to this guy's books that he found the time to write in between all of the films that he makes. Mm-hmm. And so for this episode, we narrowed it down. And spoiler alert, we'll do other Del Toro episodes because there's no way we can't talk about his other films.
No.
But so for this episode, our focus is Del Toro's work and his films set in the Spanish Civil War. And the 2 films that are set, the 2 big films he has that are set in that time period are first The Devil's Backbone, and then, of course, Pan's Labyrinth. Mm-hmm. We have a lot to say about both of these movies. I think, like, Del Toro's work, to me, like, we just finished up watching Pan's Labyrinth, and when the movie started, I've seen that movie, goddamn, like, at least 8 times in the past 2 years, and I still get goosebumps. Like, that film starts and I am in love.
I will say, anytime I rewatch any of his movies, I notice something new every single time.
Yeah.
Especially since we, like Kevin said, we just finished up watching this. We had our notebooks out, we've been doing our research, and I'm sitting there taking notes. And especially on some of the symbolism that he has in these movies. And I'm just like, didn't notice that before. Damn.
Yeah. His set design, the character outfits. Like
he pours himself into these movies, guys. He's not doing it just to make money or anything. He wants to tell a story, and he wants to tell it well. He wants you to feel the movie, like the set designs he does, the color palettes he chooses, the architecture he chooses.
It's intoxicating. Like,
you get lost in it. You get lost in it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth are a little earlier on in his career. If you haven't seen his first film, Kronos, it's totally worth a watch. I would say that it didn't age great. I fucking love Ron Perlman, and so I'll watch most things that Ron Perlman are in, but even that one, it
I still liked it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say I have not seen Kronos in a few years. But I do remember enjoying it. It's just a much, much slower paced movie. So it takes a while to get into it.
I'd say watch Kronos after you've watched a decent amount of Del Toro's work. Because if you've watched a decent amount of his work and you've fallen in love with him the way we have, and then you go back and you watch Kronos, it's almost like seeing where it all started. It's like seeing some of those tropes and those motifs that he uses in so many of his films. And like when he first tried them without a lot of experience, with a whole hell of no budget, seeing that happen in Kronos is fantastic. So you get Kronos, you get Mimic, and then after Mimic is when you get Devil's Backbone. And then after Devil's Backbone, you get Blade 2, and then after Blade 2, you get Pan's Labyrinth. So that's kind of the order of like Del Toro's kind of progress as a director. And we're really hyper-focusing a little bit early on. I have a shit ton to delve into in terms of the history that like sets these two films. Is there anything you want to talk about before we dive into kind of what the background of these two films are, being the Spanish Civil War? And I know we have a lot to talk about in each of these movies.
I just kind of want to touch on Del Toro a little bit
Mm-hmm.
prior to going into these two pieces. Currently, right now, he's 55 years old. He is not old at all.
Years young.
Years young.
Mm-hmm.
Years young, correct. He's a Mexican filmmaker. He's an author. He's an actor. He was a formal special effects makeup artist. He's done a bunch. He definitely obsesses into his work, and he wants to know every aspect of it, which I think makes him an amazing director. He doesn't just, want to stay behind the camera telling people what to do. He wants to know the insides and outs of everything, which gives him that special eye that he has. A lot of people say, working with him, he'll make you do things over and over again. He'll change things last minute, but I think it's what makes his stuff so good.
Yeah. And that's not to say that other directors don't do similar things, but I think, I don't know, like, so the other director that comes to mind, at least in the horror genre, and there's probably quite a few, but there's two that come to mind that I think are much like Del Toro. One is Jordan Peele. And by that I mean, like, you can see when Jordan Peele has had a hand in a movie, whether he's directed it or whether he's produced it. There's always something about it that, like, it's just
his style.
Him, right? Yeah. And Del Toro, especially more recently, he like is executive producing a bunch of things. And you don't even need to know that he was a producer, executive producer, or director. You watch a movie and you're like, this is a Del Toro flick because I can tell from the style.
Yeah.
The other one who comes to mind, actually, at least for me, is Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi. I know there's something about his movies that to me I can watch and I'm like, that's a Raimi film. Yeah.
Yeah. But with Del Toro, guys, his work always has connections to fairy tales, horror, that kind of gothic romancy feel. Mm-hmm. This man adores symbolism. I'll mention it in later podcasts when we bring it up, but there's a few books that I've purchased based off of the movies that he's done. And when you read into these books, some of the symbolism this guy chooses to put in there is insane, because as you're watching the movie, you get the feeling of it, but you don't realize that your brain is processing it that way.
Yeah.
He does that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And he puts you in that feeling with all this symbolism and everything he chooses, which yet again makes it the experience that it is. And it's just, I don't know. I love him. I'm a huge fan. Huge fan. His love of monsters definitely runs deep.
Mm-hmm.
He states when he was a kid, it's pretty much what saved him. Saved him from kind of like the religion that he was in and everything.
Yeah. We'll talk when we get into Devil's Backbone more so than Pan's Labyrinth. But God, like, Catholicism haunts this man and it haunts these films. And like, when we get to Pan's Labyrinth, we'll talk a bit about the way that, like, Del Toro uses monsters as a stand-in for almost like an overt paganism. And we'll talk about that when we get into Pan's Labyrinth a bit.
Yeah. And he states multiple times, at the end of the day, monsters are his family. You know, they're his comfort, they're his everything, they're his guidance. The guy has 2 houses dedicated to his collection and everything monster and things that he's loved since he was a child. And it's insane. If you've never checked out one of his houses, which is called Bleak House, do a quick Google search. You will not be disappointed. It is amazing the things that this man has in his house. I'm so jealous of the fact that when you walk in, there's a giant Samael just sitting there, a hellhound dog.
Yeah.
And I want
Hellboy.
one for our house. I just want it. I'll move it into any room. I don't even care. If we have to rotate it and put a Santa hat on it around the holidays, I'm totally down.
We have to set
need
up
it.
like a little kid's room, and it's just
It's
Samael
fine.
in the corner.
It's fine. It's totally fine. But yeah, those are some of the points I just wanted to mention. There's tons I could say, but those are just a few I'll touch on before we dive into these movies.
What question for you?
Yeah.
What movie like made you fall in love with Del Toro? So not necessarily like the first Del Toro movie you watched, but like what was the movie that just kind of captured you?
So I didn't know it was him, and I'm not going to say it's this one, but I didn't know it was him, but I loved Hellboy.
Yeah.
I grew up with Hellboy, and it was one of my favorites. And it wasn't until I started watching Pan's Labyrinth and falling in love with Pan's Labyrinth and just realizing, holy shit, this is the same guy. So it's crazy to think that Hellboy, which is like a comic movie I was obsessed with as a kid, is also the same guy who's doing these beautiful fairy tale gothic movies that I'm obsessed with as an adult.
Yeah.
So probably Hellboy without knowing it.
Yeah.
Was one of those. Yeah.
Same. I
Yeah.
think Hellboy became, and more people have been talking about this in the midst of the pandemic, of like, what is your comfort media? Like, what is the thing you can put on and just feel better about because it's on? Like, we fall asleep almost every goddamn night to Bob's Burgers because it's one of the most wholesome damn shows ever. And Hellboy, for me and my brother growing up, Hellboy was one of those like comfort movies. If it was on TV, you watched it
All the
and,
time. Yeah.
and you didn't. It was just, no matter how often you'd seen it, it was still enjoyable.
Yeah. And it was totally different from like superhero movies or anything like that. Like,
And then Hellboy 2.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Golden
what?
Army. Yeah. I just. I love those movies. I'll constantly put them on in the background when I'm painting, or if they're on Netflix or whatever, I'm throwing those on all the time. Like, they're great. They're great. I never get sick of them.
Yeah. Awesome. So one of the things I'll say is, once this episode is out and about, please on Instagram, on social media, send us, if you too are infatuated head over heels with Del Toro, send us what are the things, or what was the movie from Del Toro that just absolutely captured you, that made you fall in love with kind of the vision of this artist.
Did we mention he's adorable?
Oh my God.
Because he's absolutely adorable.
He's so squishy. I just
wanna
want to give him a big hug.
I want
That's
to
it.
hug him so much.
Like, I imagine that when you hug him, he just gives you this good belly laugh.
He's goofy. I
Yeah.
love him. He's just great. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done now.
All right.
He's
With
probably,
that,
imagine if he heard this, he'd be like, these creepy ass.
oh my God. Imagine if he hears this and he's like, I'll give you guys a hug. That's cool. Like, just stop being weird about it.
You think he'd throw in the Samael statue as well?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know.
Here's to hoping.
Here's to hoping. At Del Toro. At Real Del Toro. All right. So, both
hold
of
on.
us back.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm so
yes.
sorry. Fun fact. I did a drawing a few years ago of some of the fairies from Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Yeah.
It was so shittily done. And Del Toro,
I
at the
wouldn't say it was
time,
shitty at all.
at the time, he had an Instagram. He liked it. I freaked the fuck out. Del Toro liked one of my Instagram posts, and I broke down, cried, and was so happy. And then he ended up deleting his Instagram like 2 weeks later, and I was like, everybody's gonna think I'm a fake. All right, on to the Devil's Backbone.
Now, so before we get into that, I wanted to talk about the event that encompasses both of these films. And even though Pan's Labyrinth takes place after the official end of the Spanish Civil War, Devil's Backbone takes place during the war itself, and yet the war and the culture around the war is such an important part of the plot of these two films. It's also an important part of like what makes each character in these films so immediately sympathetic or unsympathetic. So the Spanish Civil War, I'll like full disclosure, this is one of my favorite things to study in history. Partially because like if you study critical history, if you've read A People's History of the United States, if you look into history from the ground up, if you really start to analyze those power structures, and especially when you look at empire and international affairs, it's so easy to just become disheartened, to just become disenchanted and say, like, the world is a garbage fire and let it all burn. The Spanish Civil War is one of those few events in history that you just want to hold on to, and you want to hope that it'll come out right. Like, you want to believe that what is good and right and just on this side of this civil war will win. And if you can take a guess, it doesn't. But still, what this war proved was what was capable in the fight against fascism. So it's worth noting, Spain is and was and is a super regional country. So Spain's regions of Catalonia, the Basque area, these are regions that they really have their own culture. And similar to when you look at the United States, right, and you say to yourself, like, what it means to be an American is very different if you're from the South than if you're from New England, like we talked about last episode, or if you're from like the Rust Belt, the Sun Belt, the Bible Belt, all these belts, lots of belts in America. It's very different cultures based on these regionalisms. And Spain is very similar. One of the things, though, that kind of is a forced unifier has been the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church and the monarchy, the king, in Spain have held on to really tight control for a while. That was until King Alfonso in Spain is kind of just like, he's a doofus. There's a lot of monarchies that are filled with doofuses, and this is one of those prime examples where you get a doofus on the throne at the worst / best possible time that leads to a total decline in the monarchy. So, February 16th of 1936, there's an election across Spain, and Spain is a parliamentary monarchy, not unlike when you think of England in certain ways, but with a very, very weak parliament at the time. February 16th, 1936, the Popular Front, which is this united front of center-left and leftist parties, wins a majority in the Cortes, and the Cortes is like their parliament. And that Popular Front unity government pushes forward a new constitution that creates the Second Spanish Republic. Now, these are some wild and crazy times. Some of the things that the Second Spanish Republic put forward as newly legal in Spain. You ready? Women could be educated. Women could serve as politicians. Contraception was spoken about. They were going to, and this is actually still radical, especially if you live in the United States, they were going to tax the Catholic Church. Clutch your pearls. Oh my God, the church was going to have to pay some money. Other things were going to be like ending corporal punishment in schools so that nuns couldn't hit kids. They were going to support farmers. So these are like what are generally considered liberal reforms, even though you have a center left and left wing of the party taking control. Those like the communists, the kind of more radical socialists, and even an anarchist wing that's part of parliament, in that initial birth of the Second Spanish Republic, they're not even pushing that far yet. They're just looking for like basic human rights, especially around gender. In March of 1936, the Spanish fascist party known as the Falange, which was led by José Antonio Primo de Rivera, attempt to assassinate one of the socialist leaders of the new Cortes. The Falange is a fascist party, as fascist parties were creeping up across Europe. So in the same vein as Mussolini's brown shirts, in the same vein of the Nazis in Germany and fascists in Austria, the Falange is that same kind of like hyper-nationalist, hyper-chauvinist, this like national romanticized myth of the past, but also believes that the way to power in politics is through violence, and so they're going to try and assassinate one of these young socialist leaders. The assassination attempt failed. He was injured, but he wasn't killed. And in response, the Second Spanish Republic's Cortes outlaws the Falange Party, outlaws the fascist party. And so from March to July, the fascists, along with nationalist groups, monarchists who want the king to be back in control, and the Catholic Church, all organize a coup. They organize a rebellion. And it was going to start with the soldiers in Morocco. And when I say soldiers, what I really mean is generals. These are like the top ranks, the officers, who are outraged that the Second Spanish Republic was encouraging the military to become more egalitarian. And so those officers in July 17th, begin a coup against the Second Spanish Republic. And it starts in Morocco. The Republic is immediately defended in the streets. And this is this is my favorite part of this story, is that what you do not have here is you do not have military against military. What you have is like the bourgeoisie in a country with their military elites rebelling against a republic that essentially just wanted basic human rights. And rather than having that military fight back, it was people in the streets of Madrid and Barcelona who grabbed their rifles, grabbed like the bricks and stones from the grounds, set up barricades using mule carts and other things, and fought back the fascist coup. And so you have like barbers and telephone workers who literally left their job. They said, fuck this, I'm gonna go fight some fascists. Went into the streets and stopped the coup from being successful. And so that right there is the start of the Spanish Civil War. And it encompasses what the Spanish Civil War is in the memory of many people. It's really the people defending themselves, not necessarily an organized military. And that would also have like a real negative effect later on in terms of being able to be successful later on in the war. The Spanish Civil War is broken into an obnoxious amount of factions. So we talked about like the fascist factions, right? The Falange, the Catholics, the monarchists, the nationalists, and you have the military elite. But then on the other side of this war, on the Republican side, you have the army that the Republic could muster and put together quickly. But then you also have the POUM. And the POUM are essentially radical socialist and communist forces. And then you have the CNT-FAI. And the CNT-FAI are the anarchist forces, and their stronghold is really Catalonia. So those groups, which quite frankly, outside of the Civil War, don't get along very well, those groups are all coming together to defend the Republic. there's another group that gets added in and founded in October of 1936, and that's the International Brigades. And the International Brigades is a group of workers, artists, in some cases, politicians and activists from all over the world who, when they saw the start of the Spanish Civil War, who, when they had heard about the rise of fascism in Europe, they had heard what Mussolini's parties were doing, they had heard what Hitler's party was doing in Germany. This wasn't even before things became super public, but just knowing what was creeping forward with fascism. You have thousands of people across the world who volunteer to join the International Brigades, go to Spain and fight Franco and fight fascism. And in many cases, they put their own citizenship in their native countries at risk to go do this. One of the few countries, and this is just kind of like a pretty unique caveat to this, one of the few countries who their government officially supported the Spanish Republic and sent aid and sent supplies was Mexico. Mexico sent arms to Spain to help support the Spanish Republic. So you've got all of these groups who are fighting. Most of them are not well trained. You have a lot of guerrilla warfare, a lot of hit and run tactics. And then in April 26 of 1937, Germany had been supporting the fascist side. Hitler's Germany had been sending military aid directly to Franco and the fascists in Spain. So had Italy. Mussolini's Italy was supporting Franco's fascists as well. But it was April 26, 1937, when German planes dropped bombs on the civilian city of Guernica in Spain. And it was a massacre of civilians that it led to a surge in international aid from individuals, not from countries, but from individuals. And of course, that bombing of Guernica is what inspired Pablo Picasso to create the giant piece that would be his Guernica. It's for many people at the time a chance to essentially throw up on the news, this is what a fascist future looks like. Allow fascism to grow, and this is what we will see. Unfortunately, the Republican government, the kind of centrists in the Republican government, they still believe that they can get other countries to support them rather than trying to appeal to the workers themselves and appeal to a kind of popular front. And England and France especially are signing agreement after agreement saying they won't get involved in Spain. And ironically, they're even getting like Germany to sign on to these agreements and the Soviet Union to sign on to these agreements, even knowing that they are blatantly breaking these agreements. But England and France are using it as a farce to be able to say like, oh, we signed on, so we can't do anything to, protect innocent people. And this would inevitably, more than anything, lead to the massacre and defeat of the Republican side. It's worth noting, the Soviet Union supported the Spanish Republic through the POUM, so through the communist militia in Spain. However, when Stalin begins to see that he is going to need more resources to fight the Germans, to fight the Nazis himself, he begins to pull out of Spain. He essentially uses Spain as a puppet to see what he can and can't learn from the Nazi military machine. And then when it no longer becomes beneficial to Stalin, he pulls out, leaving the POUM to be massacred. Another story from this war that I want to point to is the story of some of the people who fought in the International Brigades. There is kind of a who's who of intelligentsia who go over to Spain. One of them who catches all of the popularity for this is Ernest goddamn Hemingway. And I truly believe that people who are obsessed with Hemingway are to literature what dudes who are obsessed with Joe Rogan's podcast are to like the internet age. If you're obsessed with Hemingway, you've probably got like a little bit of chauvinism and misogyny to work through. But Hemingway he kind of goes over more as a PR campaign, but nevertheless, Hemingway being in Spain and fighting for the Republican side is a great way to fundraise for the cause. More kind of importantly, you have Paul Robeson, who is the amazing singer and actor, African-American civil rights activist. He goes over to Spain, and also George Orwell. And Orwell writes an account of his time in the Spanish Civil War fighting with the militia forces. And what's amazing about Orwell's account is that, Orwell gets misquoted so many goddamn times. People misquote Orwell to try and like use him to shoot down any kind of socialist, communist, leftist ideals. It's such bullshit. Like, this guy put his life on the line fighting for these ideals to the point where he gets shot in the neck and is like bleeding out on the battlefield, manages to get it repaired, manages to get it healed, loses his voice for a while. But he accounts his time at the Spanish Civil War front with the POUM, with the CNT. He really talks a bunch about like looking up to the anarchist forces and what anarchism could be and what anarchism showed him was possible. That stays with Orwell for a very, very long time. And then the last group that I want to talk about is how important women were to the Spanish Civil War. And if you just do like a quick Google search of the Spanish Civil War, the images that you're going to come up with are going to be so many badass armed young women and older women who are out in the front, who are on the front lines, who are leading these militias. You have La Pasionada, who is a major politician and artist who's kind of leading the Spanish Republic from the communist side. You have Emma Goldman from the United States, who's going over to Spain, again, kind of like trying to push support for the cause. So this is just an incredibly hopeful moment with a lot of utopian ideals. What could we be if we defeated fascism? It wasn't necessarily about like whether it was an anarchist future, a socialist future, a communist future, a liberal future. It was, what could we achieve if we defeat fascism, not just in person, but as an idea and as an ideology. So that's a long-winded way, and actually for me it's a short version of what I would want to talk about, of the setting for both of these films and how important the Spanish Civil War was, and the fact that Del Toro specifically chose this historical period as his background. You have anything you want to throw in there on that?
No. That is all your lovely history denseness.
Yeah, it's the Spanish Civil. There's so much to it. Please pick up Orwell's Homage to Catalonia if you just kind of want a quick read to go through, and if you appreciate a little bit of that like in-person kind of perspective. But there's so much great literature there about the Civil War. So with that, I think we should dive into the movie that's actually set in the period of the Civil War, The Devil's Backbone. Released November 21st, 2001. Do you want to give us a summary?
Sure. You can definitely give us a summary. Let's see. What did I write down? And we just watched this, yesterday? 2 days ago?
Yeah.
Something like that. So the story opens up with a male narrator saying, what is a ghost? And then he goes on to say, a ghost is a tragedy doomed to repeat itself. So there's a young boy. He ends up going to an all-boys orphanage with somebody who is labeled as kind of like his caretaker and everything. Unfortunately, the caretaker ends up leaving him behind because, unbeknownst to this young boy, whose name is Carlos, his father actually passed away. Fighting in the Spanish Civil War, was he correct?
Yeah,
yes.
They call him a comrade.
Yep, so he was fighting in the Spanish Civil War. While he's at this orphanage, he gets a group of friends later on, because in the beginning they end up being bullies to him, but he starts noticing kind of like this presence and this ghost, which they keep referring to as the Sigh.
The one who sighs.
The one who sighs, who starts popping up. Unfortunately, he later finds out that it is a kid that went missing at the orphanage, and things start to unravel. He figures out what happened to this child and everything, and in the end, this kid ends up saving all of these orphans, and a lot of shit goes down, guys. A lot of shit goes down. I mean, that's a really rough summary of it all. I'm like, should I give away a bunch of spoilers? Because we're just going to talk about it all. But
yeah, I guess we're going to talk through the details. Cool. Again, I have a lot, I have a lot to keep going on in terms of one of my big points that I want to get across, and in the way we're going to talk about Del Toro with these two movies, is Del Toro's cultural anti-fascism. But I've talked a lot about politics, so I want to give you a chance to delve in there. What's some of the first things that come to your mind in this film?
I mean, definitely the time period he put it in. So it's based in what, the 1930s?
Yeah, so this is solidly, probably like 37, 38.
Yeah.
It's towards the tail end of the Civil War. And we see that later on in the film when the two people who are kind of in charge of this orphanage, Dr. Casares and what was her name? The woman
Carmen.
who was Carmen.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's one of those names that Del Toro uses quite often. But Dr. Casares and Carmen get word that the nationalist and the fascist forces are in the town nearby. And so they need to scoop. They need to get the boys, get the orphans, and get the hell out of there. So the war plays a major part throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm. And one of the main images in this movie is actually in the kind of courtyard of the orphanage. Yeah. There's a bomb. There's a bomb that's just embedded into the ground, and everybody tells Carlos, it fell, but it never detonated. It never went off, and people came by to turn it off. So it's just sitting there. But, rumor has it that it still has a heartbeat. It's still ticking.
Yeah.
And just honestly, that bomb, I feel like it just represents, it's hard to explain, but just like the orphanage itself. Like it's constantly there to remind them what's going on. Yeah. And it's still this feeling of a ticking time bomb, but it's kind of like, it's forgotten by everybody else. So it's just like, it's like the orphanage. The orphanage is sitting there. It's a ticking time bomb, and it's forgotten by others who have left it behind, but you never know what's going to happen. One day everything could be fine, and then it completely changes the next.
Yeah. I was obsessed with this bomb as we were watching especially on our, this was probably our third time watching the movie after quite a few years. I was obsessed with trying to figure this bomb out in terms of symbolism and meaning and all of that. And so they actually show you the kind of flashback to when the bomb is dropped 2 or 3 times in the movie. And the thing that I really wanted to see is when you're in the present in the film and the shots are on the bomb, you see there are ribbons tied to the tail of the bomb. So the color of those ribbons that are tied to the tail of the bomb are the colors of the Spanish Republican flag. So I was thinking to myself, I was like, is the bomb dropped by Republican forces, or is the bomb dropped by fascist forces? And I know, for those of you who are listening, most of us probably who are listening in the United States, you're going to have to separate Republican Spain from Republican Party in the United States, because they pretty much believe in opposite fucking things. So Republican Spain is women's rights, is separation of church and state, is pushing for more equality in terms of economics, and pushing for, resource distribution and things like that. So the ribbons on the bomb are the Republican colors, and I'm like, shit, is that a Republican bomb that's dropped on this orphanage? But when you see the flashback scenes of when the bomb is dropped, there's no ribbons on it. There's nothing. The ribbons also look fairly new compared to the way the bomb looks. The bomb, it presumably has only been there for like, what, maybe a month, a few months. And the bomb looks like shit. It looks rusty and all these things. And those ribbons are super vibrant. Like the colors are still wicked vibrant. So that tells me whether it's the adults or the kids in the orphanage, they're the ones who tied those ribbons to that bomb. Like that orphanage becomes a representation of the Second Spanish Republic, of that cause of anti-fascism and of freedom. For me, the thing that came to my mind when I think of the bomb is I think of the idea of hauntology, which is this theory from Jacques Derrida, who talks about how and I'm like super kind of summarizing this, every human decision is haunted by the possibilities of what could or would have happened if we had made a different decision. Right? So like we kind of, and Derrida's a bit dramatic and a bit verbose, but he goes over the top and he's really talking about how like we as humans live our lives haunted by what could have been based on the decisions that we made. And I saw the bomb as kind of like a permanent representation of that hauntology, especially because we have a ghost story here of all of the decisions that these people in this orphanage have made, with just about everyone with the exception of Carlos and your boy Owl, who is flippin' adorable. Owl being that kid with the glasses and like the teeth and all that.
That wasn't Owl.
Yeah.
That's Galvez.
Owl. His nickname's Owl.
No. Galvez is one of the kids.
Uh-huh.
Owl is another kid.
Yeah.
They're two separate kids.
Okay, maybe I'm describing Owl wrong, but Owl is adorable.
The one with like the little steampunk glasses.
Yeah.
That's Galvez.
Oh, okay.
You got
Whatever.
it wrong. You weren't paying attention.
But with the exception of those younger kids, almost everyone throughout this film is haunted by their past, is haunted by their own decisions that they had to some extent within their own control. So I want to talk a bit about, if you're up for it, Carmen, the doctor, and Jacinto. Right?
Yes.
Those are our major like adult characters who play themselves out. And I especially wanted to look at Jacinto as everything wrong with like machismo. Everything wrong with what fascism kind of idealizes. And I found this with Del Toro through time. Del Toro will always demonize, and I guess demonize is strong because demonize almost makes it sound like they don't deserve it when they do, but like Del Toro hates a character that is all brute force.
Yeah.
So like a male character that's all brute force is almost always going to be some type of villain in a Del Toro film. And Jacinto totally falls into that. He tries to solve everything with violence.
Mm-hmm. He also chooses, the villains that he chooses have horrible pasts, and they choose to act on them differently than the other characters.
Yes.
Because he shows all his other characters have horrible pasts too.
Yes.
Carlos was straight dropped off and left, not even said goodbye to, and he's still a sweetheart. Like,
yeah.
He just shows that these are people who decided to take a different path from their tragedy.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to talk about was and I love this about him, right? When Del Toro sets up a villain, he doesn't give you a single goddamn redeeming quality. Like, there is nothing that Jacinto, and when we get to Pan's Labyrinth, there is nothing that Captain Vidal does that gives you even an ounce of sympathy for that character. And you want to like humanize them to some extent, but there's nothing that they do that gives you that. But it's not a caricature. It's not like over the top. It's those little everyday decisions that they make that are just like, oh, I want to spit on your grave one day.
Yeah. He always sets up these villain characters as people who, you know, come off put together, come off pristine, come off kind of somewhat. You look at them in the beginning and you're just like, I bet you other people admire this person.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just disgusting on the inside. They're just
Yeah.
horrible on the inside. And I noticed that he always makes them have like set schedules, set things that they do constantly.
Yeah. Mechanized.
Yes. Like, because it's drilled within them to do them. This is what I do every single day. And with Jacinto, he was obsessed. He was obsessed with that safe. He was obsessed with, you know, figuring out a way to get out of this orphanage that he's been stuck at for 15 plus years. He doesn't look at it as somewhere where he grew up and, you know, he could have good memories or anything like that. No, he just looks at it as this hellhole. He wants to buy it just to burn it down.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't look at it as like a saving grace for some of these kids. Or anything like that. He doesn't appreciate anybody who's been there. He doesn't even appreciate the woman that he's with at the moment, who's a freaking sweetheart.
Hold on. Which one?
Oh, guys. Conchita? Is it Conchita?
Yeah, Conchita.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who's like so nice, and she tries to see the good in him. She's the only one in that orphanage who tries to see the good in him. And he treats her like shit.
Yeah. You have that scene near the beginning that you're talking about where, like, he's describing, or actually Conchita asks him, like, why are you so filled with rage and hate for this place? And he's just kind of describing how, like, everyone looks down at you if you're from here. And you get that, like, 4.2 seconds of a glimmer of, like, ready to empathize with this character. And he follows that with exactly what you said. I wish I could burn this place down with everyone in it.
No, correction. I wish I could buy it.
Yeah.
So get to this certain level of prestige
Yeah.
to buy it,
Yeah.
to then burn it down.
Yeah. So Jacinto to me is also like falling for the lie of capitalism and fascism together. Because when he's talking about what his future is with Conchita, he's talking about, like, we're going to leave here and we're going to buy a farm. Right. His character is obsessed with the gold that's kept in the safe at the orphanage. He is obsessed with wealth and prestige in all of its forms.
He truly, like, his brain just blocks himself from ever leaving this place without achieving that. Without achieving that obsession that he has. Because ideally, they can fucking leave whenever they want. They know where town is. It's a days away.
Yeah.
He has access to the car.
Yeah. And Carmen says that when Carlos is introduced to the orphanage. She says, you won't find any bars here. This isn't a prison.
Yeah.
Right. And yet Jacinto always sees it like that.
And he's never left. That's the thing. He always had the capacity to leave.
Yeah.
And he's never left. The dude has stayed there for 15 years. He's a grown-ass man.
Yep.
He's not, and the thing is, like, he's not staying to help the orphans.
Yep.
He hates the freaking orphans. So it's just like, what the fuck?
Jacinto to me is like every dude nowadays who goes and buys tactical gear at Walmart and, like, owns an AR-15 and posts about, like, my rights, my freedoms, my liberty, my independence. But
Living at their
day,
mom's house.
yeah, but at the end of the day would never actually do anything for real liberty, for, like, the actual liberty to live a well-meaning life. Would never do anything for it. It's all selfishness. It's all egotism and this, like, appeal to power. So the foil, the contrast to Jacinto, is Dr. Casares. I have quite a few things. What's your take on Dr. Casares?
I love him. He's a sweetie. He does state, you know, he's been at that orphanage for 20 plus years. He's found where his meaning is, and he's not going to leave. He is absolutely infatuated with Carmen. He recites poetry for her. He's an absolute gentleman. He gets up every single day, clean shaven, room clean, and it's so sad. The one day you see him not cleanly shaven and he's kind of disheveled is unfortunately the day that he realizes they have to leave that place. They have to pack everything up and leave because he saw Mr. Ayala, who was the guy who dropped off Carlos, get shot in the head.
So much there. So much.
So much.
So one other thing to note there is that this is also the day after Dr. Casares hears Carmen, who he's in love with, who's the like principal in charge of the orphanage. She is in a sexual relationship with Jacinto,
which I have questions about.
Who is much younger. But so this scene, right, where Dr. Casares sees Mr. Ayala being gunned down. They talk in the town about these being members of the international brigades. And they're essentially saying like, oh, what are these people doing here anyways? And how some of them, including Mr. Ardaya, he's from Argentina, right? And so you have someone from Argentina. They talk about a man from China being there. And so the idea that this orphanage created a family for those who didn't have one, to me parallels with the international brigades creating a political movement for those who couldn't agree on any of the other ones that were out there. Like, if you couldn't agree with, I don't like Stalinism, so I'm a Trotskyist, but, you know, maybe I'm more of an anarchist and I'm falling in with Bakunin and all of these things. And then you've got like the liberal bourgeois and all of these elements of what were center and left politics. If you couldn't find out where you fit in there, it was pretty easy to say, you know what I fucking hate? Fascists.
Yeah.
I hate people like Jacinto. I hate people like Captain Vidal. And being able to say this is bad and unequivocally saying this is bad, not having to like philosophize about why this is bad, was so unifying. And seeing that heartbreak in Dr. Casares' face when he watches them put up against a wall and gunned down, it's like, it hits me hard. It hits me so hard because Casares isn't a partisan. Throughout the film, they talk about how like Carmen and Dr. Casares, they are doing things for the cause. They are definitely doing things for the Republican cause. But they're not like die-hard believers. And even Carmen, when Mr. Ayala drops off Carlos, Mr. Ayala goes, well, your husband, he was a great man. He did a lot for the cause. And Carmen was like, no, my husband didn't do anything compared to what I have done. He died. I have to live on and continue like helping this cause in all of the little ways of taking in the orphans, of hiding the gold, of getting people fake passports and papers to escape. And so them just kind of losing that hope when they hear that news of Mr. Arella being killed. It's heartbreaking. There's a lot of heartbreaking moments in this movie. Mm-hmm. There's a lot. So let's talk about what gives this film its title, The Devil's Backbone. What's your take on that symbolism?
So there's a scene where Carlos is hanging out with, Dr. Casares in his little, it's also a classroom, right? It's like a classroom / science lab where he has everything. /
like medical facility.
Yeah. Because he's actually is he treating a wound on his face? Yeah, he's treating a cut on his face that he freaking got from Jacinto because that guy's an asshole. Mm-hmm. But Dr. Casares is, talking to him about some things, and he's staring at these jars that are filled with fetuses. And he talks about, some children, not being born right and everything. And he points to this jar of a fetus whose backbone is exposed, whose spinal column is exposed. And he says, they call this the devil's backbone. And then he goes on to state how this fetus is actually preserved in rum. So rum is really, really old rum is preserving it. And he starts to spoon some of it out. And he says, you know, people will believe what they want to believe. They believe that this rum can treat ailments, you know, can bring, does he say like bring wealth? Like,
I don't think bring wealth, but like it'll heal diseases.
It'll heal diseases. It'll heal erectile dysfunction, all these things. And you could probably explain it a little bit better than I did. I didn't write down what he wrote, but he pretty much states to Carlos, people will believe what they want to believe, especially when they're kind of in a state of despair. So if somebody is upset because of an illness, sometimes they'll take whatever they can take if they're told it'll fix this.
Yeah.
So they'll drink the rum that's preserving a baby.
Yeah.
If they're told it'll fix it.
Yeah. But so, and the thing that I love though, because that's such an easy, and in my opinion, it's like a lazy message. It's a lazy message, to me at least, to say like, oh, people are superstitious because it's comforting. Like for me, that's lazy. There's so much that goes into superstition. There's so many reasons why people do it.
Because Carlos, so the reason he gets into this conversation, because it's slowly coming back to me now, Carlos asks him if he believes in ghosts.
Yeah. Yeah. But then, after explaining all of this to Carlos, what does Dr. Casadas do?
He takes a drink of the rum.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, like, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how
He's telling this kid not to believe in superstition. Ghosts don't exist. And then he just does that shit. Okay, sorry, go.
Yeah, but no, like, so I think this is actually perfect. And to me, this is like the way to get this message across without being lazy. And it points to what Del Toro's cultural anti-fascism is. Del Toro, to me, in these two films, wants to give no ground, concede nothing to fascism. And fascism, historically, has tried so hard to take over the kind of myths and symbols of cultures. And one of them is like taking over superstition. And Del Toro is kind of saying like, nah, everybody needs superstition. And as much as Dr. Casadas wants to be like Mr. Medical Man of Science, he still to himself goes, well, maybe it works, or maybe this is just going to make me feel better. And God damn it, that's okay. It's okay to hold on to your superstitions. Take them, make them revolutionary, make them liberatory, make them things that support you. Don't concede superstition to the other side. That's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, superstition is definitely something that gives people hope when they feel like all hope may be lost in certain aspects.
And with the boys, even if so, like Carlos, right? Carlos, for a decent chunk of the film, I think he goes back and forth on whether or not he believes in the ghost, whether or not he believes that he's seeing Santi. But he has other superstitions too. He talks to the bomb, right? Like he says to the bomb, he asks it, if you have a heartbeat, if you are real, show me where Santi is.
Yeah.
And then the ribbon flies off and shows them where Santi is.
Which honestly, I never even noticed the ribbons before until that scene. I was like, when the hell was there ribbons on that?
Yeah, so it was there the entire time.
Really?
In the present, yeah.
I never even noticed it.
Yeah. And so that brings us to Santi. I have so much.
You totally skipped Carmen. You don't want to talk about
Carmen?
Carmen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello.
Carmen, yes. Carmen, go for it.
Yeah.
You talk Carmen.
Carmen confuses me. She confuses me a little bit. She's definitely a very strong female role.
Yeah.
You know, like Kevin said, in this movie, you see that her husband passed away fighting a cause that he believed in. And now she has to continue that. You know, she has to take care of these kids every day. She's the one who has to tell them, you know, whoever dropped you off. She doesn't say it outright, but she knows they're not coming back. You know, they might pass away or something might happen. And, you know, that was kind of the case with Jacinto. He was left behind for 15 years.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think his dad was like an accountant.
An accountant,
So he definitely
yeah,
had
or
like a
something.
bougie family
Yeah.
before they died.
Um, but Carmen just confuses me a little bit because she's definitely a strong woman. You know, she's got her prosthetic leg that, does it ever say how that happened? I don't think they do. I don't think they ever
No.
mentioned what happened.
No. You'd imagine that is something to do with the war.
You'd imagine, yeah, she's running this orphanage. She has her little safe that she keeps her tabs on. And later you figure out that key that he's always looking for, it's hidden in her prosthetic leg. You know, she definitely, I feel like she has a spot for Dr. Casares, but she won't let herself into that. I don't know if it's because she doesn't want to be heartbroken again or something, or because she has shame for what she's doing. She does have shame with this Jacinto situation.
Yeah. She says to him, she says, "You are like my leg.
Yeah.
You are like my prosthetic leg. It hurts and it is a burden and it is something that I do not like seeing, but
she flat out says, like, I am ashamed
it's
of this.
necessary.
It's necessary. I need to put this on. I need to put this to stand up every day and continue to do what I'm doing."
But there's something badass in the writing of a female character who quite openly says, like, no, I also need my own, like, sexual gratification. In this
But
weird, shameful,
though?
like,
Okay.
terrible.
So this is where I'm confused. Does she need that sexual gratification, or is she doing this to keep a freaking eye on Jacinto? She knows.
Oh, I don't think.
She knows he's a piece of shit, though. Like, and you can see she's not getting touched by him, like, around her body. She doesn't even want to kiss him.
Yeah.
Like, that's how disgusted she is by it.
Yeah.
But she knows he's taking keys every single time he does this with her. I don't think she's stupid enough to realize, like, he's not taking keys, because she notices, notices
in
keys
the early scene,
missing from her link. So it's just like, yes, she's getting satisfaction out of him. Maybe, yes, she's trying to, like, please herself because she's still wants to get pleased.
Yeah.
You know? But in the same aspect, I was, like, trying to understand this in my mind, and I'm like, is she freaking doing this to keep a tabs on this dude?
It's good. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't get that.
It's a fucked up way of keeping tabs on him, but I was just like, what? Like, I was really just trying to rip apart why this woman, who pretty much raised this orphan, is having sex with him.
Yeah. Well, I also think it points to the fact that no one in this film, no character in this film is without sin, is not guilty of something, you know? Even Dr. Casares, he's guilty of essentially being a snake oil salesman, of, like, selling that rum to the villagers and knowing that it's bullshit.
But there you go. He does that to help the orphanage, to save the orphanage.
Yeah, Carmen does this. She does this terrible, not good thing. Bad thing. Bad thing. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe the like flip side, the inverse of it is this is her way of keeping tabs on this person that she has zero trust and believes is fully malicious.
Because I think she knows that, like,
but it's nonetheless
if
terrible.
he leaves, he's gonna do something bad.
Yeah. Although I would say perhaps the one kind of pure character aside from the young kids is Conchita.
Yeah.
You know? And she is a badass.
She is a badass.
In that ending scene right before her death where she stares him in the eye and she's just like, I ain't afraid of you.
Yeah, and, like, when you're first introduced to her, you know, you get this feeling Jacinto is not good and stuff, and it definitely gets proven, yet she's always by his side. She looks at him as, you know, the orphan that was stuck there for 15 years. She wants to be by his side and support him and have a better life after this and look forward to a farm and all these things. But the second that she sees him bringing the gasoline and stuff and being a piece of crap and wanting to blow up the orphans and all this stuff, she pulls a rifle on him, and it's just so sad because she knows he's horrible. Too. She stands up against him, but she can't kill him.
Yeah.
She could have ended it all there. But like, I just feel so bad because she couldn't. And then even in the end, she knows he's a piece of crap. He leaves. And she's walking down that dirt road, trying to get to the town, trying to get some help for everything that he's done. And
fixing his mistakes.
And he shows up in front of her, and pretty much he says, do what I want you to do so that I can prove myself in front of these goons that I freaking have. And she says, no, you're an animal. Like, you're a disgusting, horrible person. She knows she's going to die. Like, she absolutely knows she's going to die. So that's the road that she died on.
And you've brought this up before. There is a pretty specific and unique kind of lens of feminism in Del Toro's films. In the vast majority of his female characters, they're fleshed out, whole, real characters who, you think about like the Bechdel test and things like that. Like, they have their own motivations.
Yeah.
And Conchita is an example of that, where even before she sees the gasoline scene, when Jaime takes off or gets the little cigar ring and gives it to her in just like this like super innocent, childish kind of tween crush way. And she, almost without thinking about it, just has like the most wonderful response when Jacinto says like, what was that? Because she knows he's an asshole. She knows he's a prick. And rather than trying to explain it to him, she just goes, it's children's things. Smiles and keeps it on her finger. Yeah. So if you haven't watched this film, or if you know nothing else about this film, you probably know what Santi, or what the ghost of Santi, looks like. And just the composition of that character, it points to what you were saying before, that like part of what makes a Del Toro film is that everything is thought of, everything is accounted for, and that Santi's ghost is a ghost that looks like it is still drowning is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. How he created this character, it gives you chills. He's probably one of my favorite ghosts in a movie, if not my favorite ghost in a movie, because when Santi was killed, unfortunately his head was bashed against the concrete wall and everything, so you see the blood come out.
By who?
Jacinto. And he's laying on the ground, once he realizes he's fully dead, ties him up, and pretty much drops his body.
I don't think he was dead, though, because if you look at the scene where he's drowning, bubbles are coming out of his mouth.
No, he was dead. He felt his pulse. He literally felt his pulse and said, shit.
I don't know. Jacinto doesn't strike me as a medical professional.
No, but I think the kid was at least definitely unconscious. Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
He was twitching and just not neurologically responding well. But the water that he's encapsulated in, it's just, there's particles around it. The clouding of the blood in the water, it's all represented in his ghost.
Yeah.
You can just see that cloud of blood, constantly kind of coming out and flowing out of his head. And as he's walking, you can see those yellow particles around him from the water that he's placed in. And he's got this, whiteness to his skin that I relay as like a decaying body in water. But also too, depending on which ways he's hit by the light, you can see his skeleton underneath it, which is what is left of him, is just a skeleton under the water. So I just thought he did it so beautifully, how he represented him as a ghost.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and this is another like Del Toro characteristic, he is not afraid to mix practical effects with CGI.
No.
And I think a lot of directors don't do that. A lot of directors, like within a scene, it is either practical or CGI, and he just kind of blends the two of them so beautifully. Even with Santi himself, is like you don't even notice the transition between when you're seeing the actor in a prosthetic, and then, like you said, the light hits them and you're seeing this like CGI version where you're seeing the skeleton of Santi.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely beautiful. And the other thing that is like very Del Toro-esque is slow, brutal injuries.
Yes. But one other thing about Santi, sorry. And like that Del Toro does with especially his child characters, he never takes away that child essence from them.
Yeah.
Santi's a ghost. He's trying to get this message across, but you don't necessarily seem afraid of him because he's still, kind of running around and like still somewhat playing with Carlos at times. Like he wants to say stuff to him, but it's this kind of like hide and seek game that they're playing constantly back and forth that young kids will do.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just great. Like, it's just amazing. He never takes that. Like, he didn't make him super horrifying or like, yes, he's scary, but like he wasn't unapproachable. So I thought that connection between Carlos and Santi was, amazing.
Yeah. So there aren't many jump scares in any of his films, but he gets like that one good jump scare in Devil's Backbone, which is the keyhole scene, right? Where Carlos is like hiding in a closet, and then he looks through the keyhole, and then bam, you see Santi's eye. And I just thought that struck me exactly like you're saying. It struck me like kids playing hide and seek, not like a ghost that's out to fuck with you.
Elevated hide and seek. To the extreme.
Yeah, and Santi is the past looking for justice. As much as all of the war is playing out on the orphanage, and the fascist kind of nationalist forces are nearby, there's still this injustice in the past, which is what Jacinto did to Santi. And at first, we think that the culprit is not Jacinto, but is Jaime.
Yeah. Because you see in one of the opening scenes-ish, in the beginning, you see that he's the one with Santi's body. You see that he touches Santi, gets blood on him, and he's like, holy crap, he's dead.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you see is Santi's body getting put into the water.
Yeah.
And then at some point, Jaime above the water staring down into the blood that's like kind of like smoking at the top.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm torn on Jaime because I don't necessarily think he's a changed or better person. 3/4 of the film, you really don't like him. He's also like dropping homophobia left and right, which is done in a way where like you as the audience are supposed to be like, nah, fuck that kid. But towards the end of the film, when you realize no, Jaime had seen what Jacinto did, he is scared and he considers himself a coward, and he's like trying to make up for that cowardice. But I don't necessarily believe that Jaime is a good person.
I think towards the end he's going to become a good person, because I think they literally set him up as possibly being a character that might turn out like Jacinto.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw him as.
But then I think as everything starts to change him, as he starts to realize, especially with Carlos, like, I am bullying the crap out of this kid and he still won't rat me out, and he's actually protecting me. Like, not everybody's out to get me, And then he does have that like sweet love for Conchita and all this stuff, but he saw some serious shit. He's still in an orphanage. That still sucks. He saw his best friend literally get killed while he convinced him to go into the basement to catch slugs.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he definitely has guilt from that.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you said at the beginning when we started talking about the characters in this film. You make decisions. All of these characters have trauma. All of these characters would have a reason to make terrible antisocial decisions, but you make the decisions of what you're going to do with it. Jaime makes the decision to be a homophobic bully.
In the beginning. But towards the end, you see, he's friends with Carlos. He's letting him in. He sees that Jacinto is the bad guy, and he says, I was a coward, but I'm going to change.
Yeah. Bring him.
And then he does. And, you see him guide the young children and everything like that. He shows, I think he's one of those examples that, yes, he could have turned out to be Jacinto, but it shows that you can still change.
Yeah, and I agree that I just don't know that I believe he has changed. I think he's on a better trajectory, but I don't see Jaime as a changed character entirely. But Jacinto's end. Those spears, those shaved spears
to the pit killed me. The
Del
one
Toro.
to the armpit, I literally have to look away. I like gore.
Yeah.
I like some gore. I like well done gore.
And he is aces at it.
He is the king at it. He does not do a lot of gore in his movies. He definitely doesn't it's just the gore.
Not Dead Alive. It's
the
not,
gore he decides to do
lawnmower to the face
is timed perfectly, shot perfectly, and the spots he chooses to do them make you unique. Fucking cringe.
Yeah. He doesn't cut off an arm. He it's always very specific, and the man loves to break joints. You know?
Up close shots of joints. When poor little Galvez was coming out of the window, and just that close up screen of his little ankle snapping.
Little baby ankle.
Little baby ankle snapping makes you cringe. But I keep going back to that shot of the spear to the pit.
Yeah.
Because it is painful. It is an awkward spot. He also gets stabbed in the arm and stabbed in the back, which other movies do that, and you're just
whacked with a cane.
Yeah, but you're so desensitized to it. You're like, yes, this is a fighting scene. He's getting stabbed. But the pit, nope.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So so, Santi tells Carlos, "Bring me Jacinto." They kill Jacinto. They throw him into the same pit of water where he had thrown Santi.
He wasn't even dead yet.
No.
They stab the shit out of him, and then you just see Carlos say Santi, and they push him
And what
in.
makes him sink?
The gold.
Yeah.
He fucking took all his time and focus and destroyed everything for these gold ingots that were in his pocket and in a little bag, and they weighed him down enough. And as you see him all of a sudden not giving a shit about the gold anymore, and trying to take them out of his pockets, Santi just holds on to him.
It's that self-destruction of fascism and capitalism. They will destroy themselves. They will destroy themselves. Yeah, Devil's Backbone. Do you have more you want to add to that one?
I'm just looking through my notes. There was something I definitely wanted to talk about.
Oh, the arches. Did you want to talk about...
I did, but okay, so this is actually, we watched this part after we watched the movie. It was just a little bit of commentary that Del Toro did that I thought stuck out a bunch. Is he said the movie was about the idea of ghosts are like insects trapped in amber. And he wanted the architecture to really reflect this. So they actually use archways throughout the movie to come off as the human figure confined by the architecture. But I think he also does this in other ways.
Yeah.
The yellow water just stuck out to me. Santi's body is forever floating there in that yellow... brackish water that is filled with particles around him. And now Jacinto is too. And it's these are moments of tragedy that are just forever encapsulated in this amber, just like an insect is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also the architecture he does in his movies and everything. And these are the things, guys, and the details that he does that you don't notice, but it's what gives you the feeling that you have throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Because going back, I was like, oh my God, if he did regular doorways throughout this whole building, it's crazy that just changing a doorway really does change that feeling for you.
Yeah. It's incredible, especially for a film that has like such minimal settings. You know, the vast majority of this film is in that orphanage, and like in 2, 3, maybe 4 rooms of that orphanage, and that's it. And yet it gets across so much happens in those different settings, those different areas, in that kind of playground area with the bomb. So many things happen, and nonetheless the setting and what it's shaped to be, it, like you said, it penetrates into your mind even if you're not consciously thinking about it. Yeah. So that's The Devil's Backbone. Incredible film. And again, Devil's Backbone takes place, war is still on, but it's towards the tail end of the war. Now we're jumping 2006, Pan's Labyrinth. The film opens up, and we see a young girl who is bleeding out, essentially. And we have the narrator telling us what is this fairy tale background story of a princess who escaped her kingdom, and when she escaped, and the kingdom was the underworld, when she escaped, she forgot who she was. And then as we kind of cycle up to this young girl, we see the blood actually going back into her body. And she's kind of running around very innocently. And then we see the young girl's name is Ophelia. Her and her mother, Carmen, are on their way to go live with Carmen's new husband, who is a man by the name of Captain Vidal. Now, Captain Vidal is a member of the Falange, a fascist. He is a captain in the fascist army, and he is newly in charge of this kind of rural outpost in the countryside, and the movie is set in 1944. So at this point, the Spanish Civil War had ended. It had technically ended about 3 or 4 years ago, at the start of the film at least, but the fighting has continued, and so the Republican forces, who once were kind of a burgeoning military, are now scattered guerrilla resistance forces, partisan forces. And so Ophelia and her mom move to the countryside house, and along the way, she runs into this insect, who eventually turns into a fairy, who leads her into a labyrinth. And in the labyrinth, she meets a faun. And the faun tells Ophelia that she is, in fact, the lost princess of the underworld, and that in order for her to be able to return home, she will have to complete 3 tasks. Ophelia's mother, Carmen, is pregnant with Captain Vidal's child, and she is having an incredibly difficult, medically risky pregnancy. At the military outpost, we're also introduced to Mercedes, who is a caretaker for the outpost, and Dr. Ferrero, who is the doctor who's there to be Carmen's doctor to take care of the child. Captain Vidal is convinced that Carmen will have a son, and essentially tells Dr. Ferrero that he needs to do whatever necessary to make sure that his son is born there, so his son can be with his father. And Mercedes, we learn, is aiding her brother, Pedro, who is a part of the resistance fighters in the woods. After a series of scuffles and events, we find that Captain Vidal realizes that he has resistance supporters and informers in his encampment. While that is happening, we also have Ophelia slowly completing 2 of her 3 tasks. But on the second task, one in which she was instructed to not eat or touch anything, she fails that task, consumes 2 grapes as the Pale Man literally rips apart 2 of the 3 fairies who are there to guide Ophelia. Upon hearing this, the faun tells Ophelia that She is no longer allowed to return to the underworld, and that magic will die with her. After Captain Vidal finds a mandrake root that Ophelia was using to support her mom back to health and burns the mandrake root, Ophelia's mother, Carmen, goes into labor and dies giving birth to a child. After Ophelia's mother, or while Ophelia's mother is dying, is when Captain Vidal also begins to find Dr. Fredo, find his betrayal, kills him, attempts to kill Mercedes, who ends up getting away, tries to take Ophelia with her. They are captured. Mercedes brutally injures Captain Vidal in one of the most satisfying, gory moments of this film. Ophelia is given a last chance to return to the underworld by the Faun, but she must bring her baby brother to the Faun, and essentially she finds out sacrifice him. Ophelia instead chooses to sacrifice herself, at which point Captain Vidal is right behind Ophelia, shoots her in the stomach. We watch Ophelia slowly die. Captain Vidal tries to walk out of the labyrinth only to find Mercedes and the guerrilla forces waiting for him. They take his child, they kill Captain Vidal, they go in and they watch and try and console Ophelia as she is dying. We as the audience are told that Ophelia in fact passed the third trial and will take her seat alongside her real father and her real mother, the king and queen of the underworld. So that's the movie.
So I'm just going to say, your summaries are way more in depth than mine.
You're welcome.
I was like, Kevin, you got to do this summary. It's like 1 a.m.
I also I get goosebumps every time I watch this movie. This is like
me
such
too.
a fucking beautiful movie. But part of it is like I've shown this film in class and I adore picking apart this movie. There's so much to it. And each time, even this time watching it, there was new things that I was able to kind of really focus in on.
Yeah.
So, symbolism galore.
Everywhere.
There's also the idea that like you have these parallel narratives. There's the narrative of Ophelia, Captain Vidal, Carmen, and Mercedes in real life, but then you also have the kind of fairy tale narrative of Ophelia going through these 3 tasks and meeting the Faun, and the two sync up in very important ways. Mm-hmm. I'll also say that Captain Vidal, much like even more so than Jacinto, there ain't a goddamn thing about this man for anyone to like.
No.
Like from scene 1, as pregnant Carmen is driving up, and she's not even driving, like his men drove her, this asshole is checking his stopwatch and complaining that they're 20 minutes late.
Yeah.
And we see this obsession of Captain Vidal with time, with mechanization. His office, the backdrop of his office is this giant cog, this giant gear in the back. He has this obsession with precision. And so even if you were able to let go the fact that he was complaining about Carmen being 20 minutes late, he then, when he's introduced to Ophelia very innocently, very sweetly extends her left hand to shake his hand. And the dude takes it as like the world's biggest insult. And grabs her hand quite aggressively and just says like, you never use your left hand.
Her right hand was clutching what mattered.
Books.
So, books.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, he never gave a shit about Ophelia or her mother, like you said, right from the get-go. All he cared about was that baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he even said to the doctor, if it comes down to my wife or my child, I want my child to live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not endearing or anything at all. It's, I want my legacy to go on. I don't care about her.
Yeah.
You know, she's foolish and everything. She also lives in like these fairy tales and stuff. He never once cared about Ophelia.
Mm-hmm.
he's a piece of work. He's a piece of work, and he has daddy issues.
Yeah.
Hardcore daddy issues. So
Yeah, and it's the kind of daddy issues that are part and parcel of really fragile masculinity.
yeah,
Like,
he wants to live up to what his father was. He wants to, do, for some reason, start this tradition of when he's about to die to break a watch, and that watch gets passed on to his son so that he knows what time he died.
Yeah.
But which is weird, because when he's confronted about the watch,
He lies about it.
he lies about it.
So that's a question I had as well. That's one of the things in the film that I'm like, I don't quite get this. And it's...
Is it a family tradition that's going to be passed down? That's a secret?
No,
Like-
because the watch that he has is presumably his father's watch. That's not a random watch, because the glass on the clock face is cracked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cracked, and he's constantly like tinkering with it and adjusting with it. And you would think of somebody of his, rank and everything, if a watch broke for him and it had no meaning, he could just get another one.
That's his father's watch.
Yeah.
That's definitely his father's watch. Why he lies about it to the gentleman at the dinner party, I'm not sure. So another thing that I notice with Vidal is, especially when we're first introduced to him, and I'm pretty sure this is added intentionally, there's a sound as well as this like visual element of stiffness. Like, he is rigid, and we know that he has this very rigid personality, but he almost moves like he squeaks. Like, I imagine a smell of starch and just like a real kind of mechanical rigidity to everything this guy does.
Really? Because, like, I sense a smell of freaking whiskey and, I don't know, a lot of cologne. He looks like he wears a lot of cologne to me.
Yeah.
Not good cologne.
No. Speaking like we did in terms of the Devil's Backbone when it comes to costumes and color palettes and things like that, Ophelia is always in some way connected to green.
She has a lot of earth tones.
And I think that's her connection to the faun or Pan. I find it interesting, and I wonder how much of this is like struggles for translation. And so Desiree and I both speak Portuguese. Portuguese and Spanish are super similar. When we watch a film in Spanish, we end up kind of half listening, half reading the subtitles. And there were more than a handful of times where we were listening to what the characters were actually saying in Spanish, and they don't match entirely with what the subtitles are saying. And the fact that you have a faun rather than Pan is interesting to me, because Pan has such a strong characteristic. Pan is kind of like Pan is what the faun tries to be multiplied by 5, right?
Because Pan is usually very conniving, like very a trickster and everything. And one thing I wrote down about the faun is I never trusted him.
Yeah.
I never got a sense of trust from him. He's always very just kind of creepy. Something's not right about him. It just, how he explains himself in the beginning, where he's like, I'm very old. I come with many names. The trees have different names for me and stuff. He's got this whole spiel, and like, he's talking to a child. So it's just kind of like, she puts a little bit of trust in him and everything. And that definitely changes later on when he says, in her final trial, when he just asks, for a little bit of blood from the innocent, which is her little brother.
Yeah.
That's when she changes. And that's when she realized this guy is not good.
Yeah.
This creature that I've been following and listening to and abiding by, he's not good. This is everything that I want. I want to be princess of this world and make my brother prince, and all these things that she wants to get away from this world.
Yeah.
She's willing to throw it away, because in the end she realizes, oh my God, I don't trust you.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I think the toad the Pale Man and the Faun are all representations of either Captain Vidal or what he stands for. Right? Because the Toad, which are the three trials, right? The three trials are really the Toad, the Pale Man, the Faun. The Toad's guilty of essentially like this gluttony where the Toad doesn't care about the damage that he's causing. It's just me, 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 me. Mm-hmm. Right? Which is Vidal, which is fascism, which is like what Vidal's party and Vidal's faction is doing. And it's interesting that Ophelia uses the Toad's gluttony against him. Right? Hides the 3 stones amongst the roach. Mm-hmm. The Pale Man, for me, is kind of like the really illicit seductivity of power. It's such a seductive table spread. You want to grab. There's something there for everyone. Whether you're like me and you have a like massive sweet tooth, or if you prefer savory things, there's something there for everyone. And yet we all know what power does. We've got thousands and thousands of years of history to record what power does to people. And it doesn't matter how blatantly you are told, don't touch it. You still come close, and in Ophelia's case, she still touches it. And what happens as a result is that the people around her, or in this case, the fairies around her, are hurt. And then the Faun as Captain Vidal, especially in that very last moment, like you said, in that last trial, where he says to her, before she escapes, he says, you need to promise me your total and complete obedience. No questions. You must obey. And like, that's Captain Vidal's dream. Captain Vidal's dream is to live in a world in which people obey him. No questions asked. And when Ophelia even slightly second guesses that, the Faun's reaction is total rage.
Yeah. So I agree with all of that, but I also view all those things in a different way as well. Mm-hmm. So something, and honestly, I didn't notice this about this movie until I took like a fantasy literature course in college. Mm-hmm. It was just one of those extra credit courses, and we actually went over this movie, and my teacher was amazing, and she opened my eyes to a bunch of things. There is a lot of female anatomy references mm-hmm. in this movie. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest ones, which I didn't realize until I took this class, is, yes, the toad. So where the toad is located, it's, she explains it's this tree. It once was very beautiful. It lived and stuff, beautiful flowers, all these things. And then this toad came into its roots and it decided to be gluttonous and everything. And it's killing off this tree. This tree is pretty much dead. It can't bloom and do what it needs to do because it's just getting suffocated by this toad that's within its roots. If you look at the shot of the tree, mm-hmm. it looks, and I wonder if people will notice this now, it looks like a uterus. Yeah. It looks like it's just got 2 thicker branches at the top that are broken off, and then the big base. Yep. So I kind of look at it as a different thing. I look at it as, Ophelia wants to help her mother. Her mother mm-hmm. in this moment, is pregnant with Vidal's baby, but she's sick. This pregnancy has not been good, and it's killing her. Yeah. Ophelia knows that it's killing her. So I look at that toad kind of as I look at her little brother in an mm-hmm. essence, mm-hmm. where this tree once used to be so beautiful and strong, but it's now getting suffocated from the inside. Yeah. And her job is to go in and to pretty much feed this toad, these stones to get back a key. But mm-hmm. what you notice is when she's crawling through these tunnels, there's just walls of thick, vine and everything that mm-hmm. is the life source for the tree. Mm-hmm. And they're all dead. And I just view that as like the veins in a uterus. Like she's going down. She gets to the frog and, it's just this gluttonous frog and everything. And like, she has these stones that he has to eat mm-hmm. in order for him to pretty much like vomit and die, and that way she can get the key back.
Yep.
So it's just
So would the stones be kind of like an abortion in that case?
I don't know.
Because at that time, for a lot of women, it's not that abortions weren't possible. It's that in many cases, and this goes back to like the kind of real strong pagan roots of this film, or pagan implications of this film. A lot of times it was taking the right herbs and tinctures and things like that in order to force an abortion.
I don't know. But it's just like, I mean, even in class we argued, I don't remember, I took this class 10 years ago, but it's just, I think there was like argument of whether they represented, you know, like eggs or ovaries or things like that. But Ophelia takes it upon herself to go in to presumably get this key, but she ends up saving this tree as well because she's ridding it of what is toxic to it and everything. And, you know, speaking on like the female anatomy and everything and like just the representation in this movie, when it comes to the faun, he has those symbols on his head. You know, he's got the two horns and everything, and he's got those circular symbols, which like you just kind of view that yet again. It's just like the uterine symbol. Yeah. It's just the two horns and that base. So I see that represented in him. And then when it comes to the pale man, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't really see that much symbolism in it until she was getting into his lair and she started walking down the hallways where Del Toro brings in those archways again. That whole encasing thing is happening again. The walls going towards the pale man, they're that dark, deep crimson red with like peeling and stuff to show like age and wear and all of these things. And, you know, once she goes towards the pale man, you can see he's skinny, but he's covered in just layers and layers of stretched skin. Yeah. So he to me is like a symbol of glutton himself. Like you could tell in his past or whatever he was doing, he gorged himself. And you can see the images on the wall. He eats children. So he gorged himself on all, I'm sure, these innocent children who couldn't stop themselves from temptation, got super fat, skinny, and I'm sure he repeats this process over and over again. So it's just, I don't know. Yeah. It's just crazy.
So, and I think both are right, plus other versions of this interpretation. And that's where I think there's like this brilliant and beautiful pagan metaphysics in the way that Pan's Labyrinth as a film plays out. And like I call it pagan metaphysics, but it's also part of that anti-fascist culture as well, where all of these things can be true at the same time. Because when I first watched this film and you get to the ending, you think to yourself like, oh, this is just a beautiful kind of surrealist, almost like a magical realism, right? And then I watched the film a second time, knowing what I knew the ending was. And I realized in those first 30 seconds, I was like, holy shit. You start the film with Ophelia dead or dying. You start the film with Ophelia dying. Every minute of this movie could be the dreams of a dying girl. Yeah. Every minute of this film could have not taken place and could just have been the psyche of this young dying girl interpreting the horrors and the cruelty of a world at war, of a family, of just total inhumanity of fascism and of Vidal. And the way that her psyche interprets it is through fairy tales.
Yeah, and that's honestly what I believe as well. Throughout the movie, Ophelia is constantly being told, do not live in these fairy tales. Like, live in this real world and everything. And you can see in the beginning, her mother says these things to her, but she knows she's still a child and everything. And, you know, she's still going to give her books and have her, you know, live this life. It's not until her mother gets, you know, before she gives birth and passes away that she says, life is not perfect. We have to do things we don't want to do.
Yeah.
You can't live in these fairy tales anymore. You need to grow up.
Yeah.
But you're
And that's actually when she burns the mandrake.
And that's when she burns the mandrake. And it's just like, so Ophelia's constantly battling with it. She's a young girl living in a really hard time. And to just get this pulled away from you, and it is the defining moment in people's lives is, when was the moment you stopped being a kid and you realized I have to be an adult now? We all still hold on to these little moments of us being kids in these fantasy worlds that we still want to believe in. But this entire horrible thing that she's going through, it's so sad as a realization when you finish this movie or when you watch it again.
Yeah.
It was all just, I believe, a fantasy in her mind that she created to cope with everything that is going on.
So, but here's my argument. That doesn't make it less real.
No.
And that's, I think, the beauty of the, like, and also kind of metaphysics of this is that it can all be real. It can be a dying girl's interpretation of the cruelty of the world while also being real magic and real creatures and real myth and real fantasy. Because all of that is interpreted in our own brains. And so it's fine if it's all real. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that that's also part of that kind of like cultural anti-fascism is if you look at the fascist characters in this film, yes, you have Captain Vidal, but you also have all of those people who show up to his dinner party. And they're all so one tone. They're all so, like, homogenous, right? And then you compare them to all of the characters who are resistance fighters or sympathetic to the resistance. And all of those characters all have something about them that makes them unique and different and other, but they're united in this belief in this cause. Mm-hmm. You have Frenchie, right, who's presumably French, who loses his leg, and Dr. Fero has to cut off his leg. You also have the young man who's a stutterer, right? You have Mercedes, who is this woman who, is totally a badass, who is running this. All of these different people are, and Ophelia, I think you would throw in there as well, mm-hmm. are also unique and different, and they're all pulled and unified by this cause because they all believe that a world can be a world of and also. Mm-hmm. It can be a world in which you can be one political scheme and I can be a different political, philosophy or party. Mm-hmm. And as long as we can agree that the one thing that we will not fucking stand for is fascism, is racism, is sexism. As long as we can make that line, we can create a better world.
And that's one thing, too, that is so sad about Carmen, because you can tell that, prior to everything that happened, she had a good life with her husband and her daughter and read these fantasy stories to her daughter, and then just reality hit. Her husband passed away. You can tell, she still wants to provide for her daughter and provide some sense of safety. Mm-hmm. And sadly, what she thinks she needs to do is marry the captain because she knows he's a piece of shit. You can tell she doesn't agree with his ideals, mm-hmm. but her job is to sit next to him and be quiet and follow rules. And this is how she thinks she's going to protect Ophelia and now protect her son. Yeah. And it's so sad because you see her get shut down at the dinner table because you still see those glimmers.
That's such a cringy scene.
You still see those glimmers of her being one of those characters, like you were explaining. Yeah. Her being like Ophelia and like the Frenchie guy and, everybody that's fighting. Yeah. And like Mercedes and all these things. And she's just getting shut down by him constantly, and that mm-hmm. will be her life if she was to live for the rest of her life, and she's willing to make that sacrifice, sadly, for her daughter, where other people, they're fighting against that. They're not giving into that and everything, and it's this toss-up of, do I do this to protect my daughter or do I fight for what I believe in? And it's just sad.
And the idea that the way to be an adult and the way to deal with a cruel world is to give up on creativity and magic. So I really think that's what Del Toro, I think, is railing against when you hear him in interviews and he says that like Monster saved his life, right? I think what he's trying to say is by refusing to give up on fantasy, by refusing to give up on, you know, the weird and the out there, you're really able to say, I won't give in to a fascistic view of a unified version of reality and adulthood and maturity and all those things. And I demand that reality becomes and also. And I think that's beautiful. And I think it's necessary and it's lovely. And the other thing that I think is necessary and lovely is the way that Del Toro pulls off gore in this film.
He did it again, guys.
This could so easily have been just a fantasy film, and we wouldn't even consider it for part of the horror genre. And this is one of those things that really pisses me off, is when movies like The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth doesn't get considered to be horror movies. Nah, this has every facet of a horror film. You've got creatures, but you've also got, like, these really intense moments of gore. And if you have a semblance of hope in the beginning of this film of Captain Vidal being a redeemable character, all that shit washes away in those first few minutes with the scene of the farmer and his son.
Oh, I have to turn my head on this scene. I can't. Like, it is yet again shot so well and so real. Like, I imagine if somebody's face is getting bashed in with a bottle, that is exactly what it would look like.
But the camera angle is brilliant, because if you look at the camera angle on that scene, right? And like the first 3 times I watched this, I never noticed the camera angle, because exactly what you said. I was like, oh, Jesus. Oh, God. But then you realize the scene itself is shot once Vidal starts slamming that bottle into the farmer's son's like nose cavity. It's shot from right behind the shoulder of the farmer's son and aiming up. And so what you are forced to watch is Vidal's cold face and his cold mannerisms as he brutally kills this kid, right? Kills this young man in front of his father. And again, it goes to the idea that Del Toro doesn't give you a redeemable villain, and I like that. I want my villain to be a villain. There is no redemption. There is no, oh, but I kind of get why. No, you are a terrible person because of the decisions that you made. So you've got that scene of gore, but then the other scene of gore that I think is just also brilliantly done is when Dr. Ferro is amputating Frenchie's leg. And the thing is, most directors, if they were directing that scene, would have done everything to the point where the doctor goes, you know, I'm going to try and make this quick. And then perhaps added like a really gruesome, grisly sound effect, but cut away. And what Del Toro does is he doesn't cut away. Instead, he points the camera right at the leg, holds it there for a few seconds, and then you watch as the doctor's saw gets the first cut into the flesh, and you watch the flesh like shift and move.
Yeah. And you can see he's not being light-handed. Like he said, I'm going to do this in as few strokes as possible. And he keeps to his word, because that first stroke probably takes a third into the leg already. Probably just everything into the leg right before he gets to the bone.
Yeah. And so what I think is brilliant about the way Del Toro does gore is I love gore. I know you're not huge on gore. I can't do like, and we talked about this in episode 0, I can't do like torture for 2 hours straight.
But I respect the way he does gore.
Yeah, so like I adore most gore, including like cheesy, over the top gore. But with Del Toro's gore, you feel it.
Yeah.
You know? You're like, I can watch Hellraiser pull people apart with chains all day long, and I'm just like, that was cool. But you don't actually have that like cringe moment of, ooh, almost every time. And I'm talking across like all his films, even just if you've ever seen the first opening scene of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, you can't watch that opening scene of that film without literally like holding your mouth
teeth.
and holding
Yeah.
your teeth. So his gore, while it's not throughout his films, it's a gore that you empathize with, and you sit there going, God, that looks terrible. And that happens throughout Pan's Labyrinth as well, because you have the saw, but you also have I forget the guy's name, but the gentleman who stutters, who's captured by Captain Vidal, and you see his hand.
It's just ripped in half, pretty much, just hanging there though.
Yeah.
But like, are you really gonna leave out probably one of the best gore scenes in this movie? Because it's probably one of my favorite ones in a movie in general.
Which one?
When Mercedes shoves a knife into Vidal's mouth because he decides to turn his back on her because she's just a woman and she is not a threat to him. She keeps this little knife constantly hidden in her apron, and it's the knife that she uses to make his food for the day, you know, care for him, all this stuff. Uses it to free herself, stab him in the back, shove it in his mouth, and rip his frickin' cheek open.
Yeah, with
and
the
says,
beautiful line. Go for it.
Yes, just like, you are not the first pig I gutted or something
Yeah.
like that. I love it. That's a moment where you're sitting on the couch and you're like, fuck yeah.
And like the symbolism in there too, right? Of this is a very working class tool. This is literally the thing that she does, that she labors with all day.
It's not all the fancy tools that he's literally playing with, talking shit while he thinks she's like just behind him.
Yeah. And it is her knife, that working class instrument. Fucking
and I just
jokers
love that
his
that's
face.
the knife that feeds him every day. So
Yeah.
it's going to cut his freaking mouth open.
Yeah, and then he goes to like drink a little shot of
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Tough
vodka
guy
or something.
freaking sews his little mouth back shut and continuously takes freaking shots of alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that gets us to where we might round this out, is perhaps one of the most satisfying endings ever, which is Vidal.
So hold on, before we talk about the satisfaction of it, I want to talk about kind of like the things leading up to it a little bit that I noticed. So to reflect back on, I noticed it watching the movie this time, you know, stating that Ophelia's in a fantasy world, this is what she does to cope. I don't think she died technically in front of like, before the labyrinth goes down into like that basement type area. I think she died before that. So do you remember when she was running in the labyrinth and the captain was behind her and she got to a dead end and then the labyrinth had to shift itself in order for her to continue on in her story?
Yeah.
I think that's actually where she died. Like, at least I saw it this way this time. Before the labyrinth shifted, he probably shot her and killed her there and they found her. But her brain continued on with that story. She made it to kind of where that encircling is.
Yeah.
She made it to, unfortunately, being shot and her blood being the one that was chosen as the innocent and everything, going up and seeing, you know, her mother and father and, you know, everything else, which also her mother and father represented people who passed on because they're both gone now. But I just thought that was a point I noticed this time that I didn't notice before, because it's that continuation on of her story and her mind making this up to cope.
I agree. I do think she made it to that stairwell, though. I just think that maybe she made it to that stairwell. And again, it's that idea of the metaphysics of like and also, right? And also she imagined that she got there because the labyrinth helped her.
True.
You know?
True. But I was just like, damn, where's she going to go now? And then it had opened up and I was like, oh, maybe this is where she died.
That opens up the question. And again, this is all up to interpretation and can be part of the end also. When Vidal does get to her, she is arguing with the fawn and Vidal cannot see the fawn, you know?
No.
And one could argue that's because the fawn's not real, but one could also argue that that's because Vidal doesn't get to tap into magic. He doesn't
Well, he's also immortal, because remember, they want to prove that she's not immortal.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of the challenge is
Yeah.
that she's not actually in that, or supposed to be in that world.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Vidal shoots Ophelia, and then grabs his son, tries to walk out of the labyrinth, only to be met with all of the guerrilla fighters, with Mercedes and her brother in the middle. And damn it, do I love this like few seconds, because it's so goddamn satisfying. Because he hands the baby over to Mercedes, and he tries to like straighten himself out, takes out his little goddamn watch, and he's just like, tell my son what time I died, and tell him that his father, and boom, Mercedes cuts him off. And she just goes, like, it's such a simple no. And it's just cutting, right? Because she's just like, no, he's not even going to know your name. You didn't give a shit about this child as a human being, as an individual. Mm-hmm. All you cared about was passing down the legacy of your name, and we're going to prevent that from happening.
And never once did it cross this asshole's mind that somebody might say that to him. Yeah. Because yet again, that's the entitlement he thinks he has. Mm-hmm. That's the power he thinks he has, that everybody is going to listen to him mm-hmm. and obey him. Mm-hmm. Never once did he think, hey, I'm a piece of shit. Like, when I die, are the people that kill me going to tell this to my son?
Yeah.
No.
And this is the crescendo of the third act, in which what he is forced to watch is Captain Vidal is forced to watch all of his authority and all of the power that he thought he had entirely fade away. And it starts with Dr. Ferrero, when he goes in and he injects enough painkillers to kill the man, the man who stutters, so that Vidal can't torture him for information anymore. And Vidal literally says to him, like, just dead serious, he says, I don't understand why you didn't obey me. Like, this man is so entrenched in his ideology, he can't understand why someone who he sees as quote unquote lesser wouldn't obey him. So he's got that. And then he watches and he finds out that Mercedes is betraying him, right? And he says to Mercedes, you must think I'm a monster, all of these things, but he still literally cannot understand why Mercedes betrayed him.
Because he says, I could have given you all of these things had you asked.
Yeah. Doesn't understand that, like, this is her moral cause. Mm-hmm. And then lastly is the betrayal by Ophelia, right? And when he's pissed and he's holding on to Ophelia in her room, he says to her, how long have you been laughing at me? What he's most upset about is the fact that his power and his authority that comes from that, like, super fragile machismo violence is totally dissipating. And we see that, you know, physically in the setting, with the guerrillas attacking the encampment, killing his generals, blowing shit up and all of that. And then just the final straw is just his son won't even carry on his name and won't even know who he was.
And then, boom, shot through the face.
Shot through the cheek.
Shot through the other cheek.
Yeah. Yeah.
And dropped to the floor, and he is forgotten. Done.
Mm-hmm.
Piece of shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was a quote that came to my mind as we were talking about and thinking about this film. And it's from one of my favorite thinkers, Antonio Gramsci, who is an Italian Marxist, who is also an anti-fascist. And the quote is, and I think it's super telling for our times right now, you know, we're recording this in July of 2020, that the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters. And I think it means so many different things, and it goes to that and also idea that, you know, the monsters can save us, the ghosts can bring us to justice, the fawns can bring us to our kingdom in this utopia, but the monsters are also the Vidals of the world, the Jacintos of the world. The monsters are around in these times. And I think especially right now, when we're seeing such fucking horrid violence, whether it's overt violence from the police, and, you know, it's 2020 and we're still talking about the fact that a man was lynched in California, or whether it's kind of like the more subtle violence of leaders literally throwing people and people's lives out by ignoring the pandemic that's around us. I think right now we too are in the time of monsters in many ways. So, Del Toro, and I think we've spent 2 hours literally gushing about this man, and there are many more hours that we could gush. That's the funny thing.
And if you've made it through this 2-hour podcast of us talking about 2 of his movies, and you have yet to see any of his movies, please watch something from this man. Like, they're just amazing.
Yeah.
They're just amazing. His movies will always be my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. It holds a special place. It really does. And if you don't think that these films are horror, I really challenge you to go back and watch them. If you haven't watched them, then what the fuck are you talking about? But if you have and you're like, oh, I'm not sure this is horror, I really challenge you to watch them and watch them with like a kind of younger eye, maybe like a child's eye, and see how this can still be horror. I think for a lot of us who are fans of horror, we're so desensitized in a way, and we're always looking for more and more and perhaps like pushing what scares us, that it's one of the reasons why I love Del Toro is he always reminds me of what I would have been afraid of as a kid, right? Like if I had seen Pan's Labyrinth as a child, I would have been scared. If I had seen Devil's Backbone as a child, I would have been scared.
If the fawn would have walked into my room, I would have shit myself. Like he would not be one where like, oh, hey, how you doing? Like,
no,
it would have scared me.
If the fawn walked into your room and took his prosthetic head off and it was just Doug Jones offering you a hug. Huh?
Can he take the suit off as well?
So that's what we got for you guys this time around. We'll have this episode up soon, and we'll, before you know it, be working on the next one. We still love to hear from you all. We've been getting some really, really great feedback on the podcast so far, but we want to know what you want us to talk about, things that we said that were interesting, and also, you know, what your point of view on some of the things that we've brought up is.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys listening to it, you know, giving us feedback. Let all your friends know, you know, give us a like, give us a follow, mention us when you're talking to somebody.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, rate, review, subscribe. I know these are the things that like every podcast says to you at the beginning and the end, but seriously, guys, it helps a bunch. It helps a tremendous amount. Follow the Instagram, and if you enjoyed this, try and get the word out. This is Kevin.
And this is Desiree, and it's definitely not the last you will be hearing of Del Toro.
But we're going to be closing the lids on this episode of the Two Coffins to Speak podcast.
Have a good night, guys.
Take care.